Hi everyone, welcome to another exciting edition of Words, Images, and Worlds. I am always delighted to talk with comics creators, graphic novelists, people that work and that in visual worlds and that work on books that I love to share with educators. And in this case, I am talking with author, artist, creator Mai Nguyen. Mai, thank you for jumping in and talking with me for a few minutes.
Of course, and thank you so much for having me.
It is absolutely my pleasure. As I was saying before I hit record, I have written about your work. I've shared it with pre-service teachers, and in particular, I'll mention Pilu of the Woods. That's the graphic novel that I know you for best. It's a wonderful book that explores grief and life experiences and joy, all in this really fantastic way. Meaning fantasy, but also wonderful. And at the end of the book, you even have, if I'm remembering correctly, I think there are recipes back there, as well as writing prompts and just a variety of resources for readers to enjoy.
A lot of the back matter was actually my editor's idea, just to make it more
Nice.
accessible and inviting to kids and also like librarians and teachers. The recipe in the back is my mom's recipe for mushroom rice, which is also included in the story itself.
Mhm.
I simplified it quite a bit, so it's a bit more accessible to like younger people, cooking with a guardian or parents. And then there's like a little nature journaling section as well, where you can take observations about nature around you and make notes and just kind of be more present in the outside world and engage with that aspect of the world as well.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. A beautiful book. I'm curious how you first connected with storytelling.
Yeah, I love this question because I think a typical answer you get is like always, since
Right.
ever, right? With any creator. That's definitely the case for me as well. My mom is Japanese, so I grew up with a lot of comic books in my household.
Mhm.
Especially I have two older sisters. They're 6 and 7 years older than me. So I was always surrounded by comics that were not necessarily like appropriate for my age. But I
Uh-huh.
think that
Uh-huh.
also upped my like literacy level a bit as well.
Yeah.
And I always talk about how like I was way more visual literate way before I could even read. So I would spend a lot of times looking through like comic books, even before I could read Japanese, and I just flip through the images and just really immerse myself in the world. If I
Mhm.
didn't know what was really going on, I just like make dialogue by myself in my head and just to make up the story and just flip through the pictures. So storytelling was always a huge part of my childhood um, ever since I could get my hands on a book. And I think that's really
Nice.
continued throughout my whole life. In high school and college, I was a little bit resistant to like jump into the arts because I was thinking
Mhm.
about, what's a stable job?
Right, right.
Something that, won't make my parents worry. I can't just throw myself into a creative field because I don't feel that that may be the most like stable or consistent career. And I did a little bit of like design and graphic design, seeing how I could use my skills in a more like office environment. But I
Mhm.
always gravitate towards comics and drawing and doodling, and that's kind of where I find myself now.
Nice, nice. Love it. Yeah. And I love how comics are just this great way to engage with the story that's maybe a little more mature than where you are, but you got an entryway. You've got a way of getting into the story, even if the words and the narrative are a little bit more challenging. So I love kind of that like embedded all ages ness.
Yeah,
There's a
I
better word
think
for that, but you know.
Yeah, and I do see more conversations around the importance of visual literacy amongst teachers and librarians. And I think that's amazing because growing up, comics or graphic novels were considered not real reading, right? But
Hmm.
there's
Hmm.
so much empathy and like emotional intelligence you can gain through visuals. And then the other benefit I see is my husband is dyslexic. He has a
Hmm.
really hard time reading, but he loves comic books because he can pick up so many contextual cues through visuals, and that really helps the story form much more clearly, not just depending on like prose. And
Mhm.
so I don't know, I think visual literacy is awesome, and I love that it's much more of an active conversation now across libraries and schools and things like that.
Absolutely, absolutely. That may dovetail really nicely with our next question, which is I know that the graphic novel takes a lot of time. There's a lot that goes into that page, the scripting, deciding on elements, deciding on what's going to go there. So I'm curious about what it is you hope readers notice in your work and take away with them.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think as a middle grade creator, the first thing I want people to get out of my work is a sense of adventure or fun, just able to immerse in the world that I'm presenting, right? I want it
Mhm,
to be a fun, positive experience. And then the other thing that's really important to me is for readers to be able to connect at an emotional level to my characters. That's a pretty straightforward answer, but I do spend a lot of time building the emotional arc and the internal story of my character. I think that's like a huge part for me of writing.
mhm,
And whenever I hear people say, like, oh, I really connected with this aspect of your story or these parts of your character, it means a lot to me because I put so much heart into, that aspect of writing. So I hope those two things really shine through in my work for it to be fun and for it to be to help readers feel really connected.
love that. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Um, Curious about, I mentioned a little bit there about the time-consuming process. I'm curious about your process and the things that you typically do, either in terms of inspiration, tools, anything that like that that you'd like to share for listeners.
Yeah, I'm still figuring out my process. It's incredibly painfully slow for me. The easiest part for me is kind of ideation, right? I'm really easily inspired by nature, or
Mm,
whenever I go out hiking, there's always some sort of like atmosphere or imagery or something that really sticks with me and makes me kind of imagine a world around it. And
mhm,
I kind of build a story around that, right? So for Pilu of the Woods, actually, I was hiking through the redwoods here in Northern California. And you see these redwoods where after like a wildfire, the inside kind of burns out. So they're like
mhm.
hollow tree stumps and they look really interesting and beautiful. And I remember thinking like that would be a perfect hiding place for like a little forest spirit. And I had that image like stuck in my head and I really wanted to draw that out and then see what story I can form around it. So that's how I frequently kind of draw inspiration. I kind of have this like visual in my head that I just want to create a story around.
Mhm.
That part's always fun for me. The hardest part for me is to kind of get all the jumble, like all the ideas in my head onto paper
Mm.
because I have to somehow communicate that to my agent or my editor and be like, I swear this is gonna be a good story.
Right, right.
I find that part really difficult. And obviously, kind of continuing to build a story that feels interesting and engaging, hitting the right beats. The more like craft aspect of it can be a little challenging for me. Um, a lot of just sitting and staring into like a space and just hoping the good idea will come. Um, in terms of the drawing part, I really enjoy that part too. It's incredibly tedious, comics take years, but I've always loved drawing and I always get a lot of joy from the craft of illustrating, drawing, thinking about the composition of a page and how that will impact emotion or storytelling or pace. That part comes to me pretty easily. But the ideation to getting the story on paper, that part I'm still figuring it out
Oh
one step
yeah.
at a time.
Yeah, that reminds me, a lot of folks that come on that have worked with like Marvel and DC and Dark Horse, they talk about that stage of like breaking down the story. So getting it from like those ideas, that script, and all of those things to like, how is that actually going to be laid out on the page? That seems to be one of the tricky parts of the entire process.
It is. It's comforting to hear I'm not the only one
No, no,
struggling
by
through
no
that.
means. I imagine they call it breaking down because of the way you take the visual and you kind of link that with the verbal storytelling. But I imagine it's also a breaking down process in a lot of ways.
Oh yeah. Oh
So
yeah.
yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah. Well, I'll mention one more time before our final question that Pilu of the Woods is just it's a beautiful book. You were talking about hoping that readers will invest with characters, and the way you set that story up, the emotion that goes into it is really captivating, as well as the magic and the fantastic aspects that you bring to it. I know that you have another book on the way if my
Mhm.
Amazon is correct. And is it Anzu and the Realm of Darkness? Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay,
Yes.
all right, all right. So curious to hear about that. Anything else that you'd like to mention as far as your creative attention and focus at the moment? And then I always like to ask about spaces where people can connect with you for school visits, to get in touch, to follow the work as it's coming along.
Yeah. So, Anzu and the Realm of Darkness is my next book, which I actually have an arc of right here.
Oh,
Oops.
lovely, lovely.
Yeah. So that's coming out in May, I believe. It's a story about a girl who follows this dog who steals something important from her. So she's chasing it and then she somehow ends up in the underworld, specifically the Shinto underworld, which is called Yomi.
Mm,
And so the story is about her trying to return home before it's too late, before she gets stuck in the underworld forever. It's a little different from my debut. It's much more kind of adventure
mhm,
packed
mhm,
and a bit more fantastical. And it also has a lot of elements of Japanese folklore and different types of monsters. So I think it's a bit more of like an adventurous, fun story. Um, and let's see. And you mentioned what other projects I'm working on. I've basically been working on that for the past few years,
uh-huh, uh-huh,
um, as well as the sequel for it. So that's been keeping me pretty busy. In terms of where I can be found, I'm not very active online. Um, but there's always my website, which is ohmypie.com, and you can
mhm,
always email me. I love getting in touch with my readers. And I love getting to hear, their opinions on my work and
mhm.
things like that. So I may not be super available online, but I'm definitely easy to contact.
Fantastic, fantastic. Well, glad to hear about the new book on the way. I know that you put a lot of time and energy and creativity into it. And I love the mythological and the fantastic in that way as well. So looking forward to that. And glad to hear that it has a potential sequel, perhaps a series. So sending all the good book love vibes that way. I'll gladly share this now as well as on the book birthday. As it comes into the world.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Mai, thank you for the talk through. Did we miss anything that you want to make sure to share before we close out?
No, I think that was really great. Thank you so much for having me. It was a blast chatting to you.
Yeah, yeah, great to talk with you as well, and glad to have you back anytime as you're working on projects.
Awesome. Sounds good. Thank you.